All right, welcome back. We're going to continue on with our bone growth and remodeling regulation story. And as I mentioned on the last video lecture, one of the key things that determines how bone growth and remodeling function in the body is the level of calcium ions in your blood and other body fluids as well. So really we're here where I've got blood written. Come on, stylus, right. Why is this thing not working? There we go. Really there where I've written blood calcium levels, calcium ions in your blood move out of the blood and into your tissue fluids. So we're really thinking about body fluid levels of calcium ions in general and not just in the blood. Okay, so what do you need these calcium ions for? Very important for nerve impulses to be transmitted properly by your nervous system, all of the communication that takes place between the brain and the spinal cord and all of your nerves. Muscle contraction, as you guys are going to learn in the next unit. Blood coagulation, you need calcium to be able to clot your blood properly. Learn about that next semester. Calcium is needed for proper secretion by different glands and nerve cells, neurons. It's needed for cell division. And then there are even other areas where calcium ions are needed as well. So they're extremely important. You've got to maintain proper levels of calcium ions in your body fluids. And it's regulated through a negative feedback type system. So just like everything else, if calcium ions in your body fluids get too high, you need to reduce the levels. If they get too low, you need to bring them back up so that you maintain an average level that is appropriate for the proper function of your body. Another thing that's important, muscle contraction, that includes the cardiac muscle in your heart. So for calcium ion levels must be maintained within homeostatic ranges for proper heart function as well. All right, so calcium is pretty important. So how does this homeostatic control mechanism works? There's a key hormone that's involved, and it's called PTH, or parathyroid hormone. And it's kind of a pretty simple story, all right? So the parathyroid gland, you guys, the parathyroid glands, where are those located? All right, if you guys remember, your thyroid gland kind of looks like a butterfly, and it's sitting here on the anterior side of the neck, just anterior to the trachea. And if you flipped the thyroid gland around and looked on the back, you would see 3 or 4 little bean-shaped glands sitting on the posterior side of the thyroid, and those are called your parathyroid glands. And if I recall correctly, most people have 4, some people though have 3, so it can vary from person to person. So again, they're on the posterior side of the thyroid. So there are cells in there that are programmed to be sensitive to the calcium ion levels in the blood and body fluids. All right, so if calcium ion levels are falling too low in the body fluids, the parathyroid glands release a hormone called PTH, or parathyroid hormone. PTH gets into the bloodstream, it travels all throughout the body, and it has certain targets. One of the things that it targets are the osteoclast cells. All right, so what are they going to do? They're going to dissolve bone matrix, and they're going to release calcium ions from that bony matrix back into the bloodstream and your tissue fluids. And so as that happens, you'll have an increase in calcium levels. All right? So your calcium levels come back up. Well, once they start getting too high, what you have to do is you just shut down that process. The parathyroid glands will quit producing so much parathyroid hormone. What's that going to do to your osteoclast? That's going to decrease osteoclast activity, and you won't degrade as much bone matrix. You will not release as much calcium back into the bloodstream and your body fluids. So it's pretty straightforward. Your blood calcium levels are mainly controlled by this hormone called PTH, or parathyroid hormone. And here's a diagram from your textbook, which is reviewing that. So you've got a homeostatic mechanism here. Your stimulus is falling blood levels of calcium ions. These little bitty glands on the back of the thyroid, the parathyroid glands, will detect that, and that causes them to secrete PTH. PTH travels throughout the body, and all of those osteoclasts, which they're mainly sitting, they're within the periosteum, so they're on the surfaces of bones, the outer surfaces, and then they're also sitting along the endosteum, that inner membrane that covers bony surfaces on the insides of bone, so they're sitting there as well. They become activated, they start secreting their acids and digestive enzymes, release calcium ions into the body fluids, and that brings your calcium ion levels back up to where they need to be. And your textbook is actually telling you the numbers. You should have about 9 to 11, pen's not writing, there we go, 9 to 11 milligrams of calcium ions for every 100 milliliters of blood or other body fluids. That's actually a lot. That's a pretty significant amount for a little bitty ion like that. There's another hormone that is produced within the body. Calcitonin is a hormone that is produced by the thyroid. So we talked a little bit earlier about how the thyroid makes hormones that control your metabolism. That's true, but the thyroid also makes a hormone called calcitonin. And what happens is, as your blood calcium levels go up, now we just said the parathyroid glands are going to quit producing PTH when that happens, and that'll help return your calcium levels back to a lower state so they don't get too high. The thyroid gland, when it detects high blood calcium levels, it secretes a hormone called calcitonin, and calcitonin may influence osteoblasts to deposit calcium salts in the bone matrix, or stimulate the deposit of calcium into the bony matrix. Okay, and so by doing that, that might be helping to decrease calcium levels in the blood and body fluids. Apparently in some other types of mammals, this is a very critical process. The role of calcitonin, though, in humans is thought to be pretty minimal, so this is not actually thought to be playing a major role in calcium homeostasis, but it may be involved to some degree. PTH is the hormone that is mainly involved in controlling your calcium levels. Another hormone, interestingly, that may also be involved in influencing your bone density is leptin. Leptin is a hormone that is secreted after you've eaten a meal, and it's supposed to suppress hunger and triggers the sensation of fullness. And interestingly, it's thought to inhibit osteoblasts, which would mean you would have less bony matrix being deposited. So leptin is thought to maybe also be involved in some way in influencing bone growth and remodeling, although I don't think that's all that well understood, why that hormone would be doing that. There's still a lot to learn about our body and the body systems. We certainly do not in any way know everything yet. All right, so that's hormonal control of bone growth and remodeling. Again, the key hormone to remember is PTH, and what triggers its release and its impacts on the osteoclasts, and how and why that raises your blood calcium levels. And then when they come back up where they need to be, PTH gets shut off so you don't keep triggering more and more and more dissolving of bone by the osteoclasts. All right, also we said mechanical stresses have an impact on bone growth and remodeling. So how about these mechanical stresses that we've been talking about? When you bear weight bearing and lifting heavy things and being active and walking and running, how does that influence bone growth? So there is a law about bone growth called Wolff's Law, named for somebody named Wolff, who first came up with these ideas some years ago. And Wolff's Law states that a bone grows or remodels in response to the forces or the demands placed on it. So that basically means that, like we've already talked about, areas of bone that deal with more weight or have more stress placed on them are going to grow thicker, and areas of bone that don't bear a lot of weight are going to be thinner. And so what are some observations that support that? If you're right or left-handed, if you had x-rays taken of your right and your left arms, in all likelihood, if you're right-handed, the bones in your right arm are going to be a little bit thicker than the ones on the left. Any type of curved bone in the body tends to be thickest where they are most likely to buckle. So if you think about a bone, bending it almost like maybe like a green stem, where that would tend to bend if a force was placed on it from the side, that's going to be the area of the bone that's going to achieve the most thick development. The trabeculae, remember those are the little subunits in your spongy bone. Those form along lines of stress, which we've talked about a little bit earlier. We talked about how they kind of have that shape like this, where they crisscross. And so those crisscross shapes, those little trabeculae, those little subunits are going to be oriented so that they can handle the most weight bearing. If you've got weight coming down like this onto spongy bone, having that kind of crisscross shape, kind of like railroad bridge trusses, tends to distribute the weight back and forth like this, and it allows the spongy bone to bear a lot more weight than it could if it wasn't arranged in that crisscross type pattern. And like we've already mentioned, you tend to have large bony projections in the skeletal system where heavy active muscles are attached. All right, and here's a pretty good little diagram from your book that is making you think about the weight bearing that occurs with the femur, your thigh bone, and how this influences development of the bone. So what they're showing you here is your body weight is pressing down on the femur, and the head of the femur, of course, is taking on a lot of that body weight load. And so what's happening, if you think about your body weight pressing on the head of the femur over here, if you can kind of visualize this for a second, that is causing this side of the bone to compress. If you think about pushing down on the head of the femur, because that's what your body weight is doing, over here on the medial side, you have compression. The bony matrix over there is being forced down like this. And actually over here on this side, the bone is being stretched as you press down on the head of the femur. So you have tension on both sides. And interestingly, tension, what do we have in the bone that is actually helping the bone resist breakage by that bending or stretching or tension that's happening over there on the lateral side? One of the key things are those collagen fibers. Just like you have in other connective tissues, they provide tensile strength. So that's important over there. Compression, the hydroxyapatite matrix. Those hydroxyapatite crystals are helping resist the compression over there on the medial side. So that's why you need all of these good things in your bony matrix. You don't just need the hydroxyapatite crystals, you also have got to have collagen fibers and other things in there as well for bones to have their proper function. And the other thing they're showing you here on this diagram, so you've got all this compression going on over here and tension or stretching going on over here, and those forces are occurring in opposite directions. So in the middle, you really have no stress on the bone. Those forces cancel each other out there in the center. And so think about where your medullary cavity or your marrow cavity is located. It's right there within the diaphysis in the center. And the reason why you can have a cavity like that in your long bones is because in the center portion of the bone, you don't have any compression or tension, stretching forces being placed on that area under normal circumstances. So like we've said, the form follows function. Anatomy follows function of the body. All right, a couple of other little tidbits that are kind of interesting. So this remodeling that's taking place occurs all the time. So you have osteoclasts, again, that are within the periosteum and the endosteum. And then you also have osteoblasts in those locations as well. And they form these little units that are called remodeling units. And so constantly throughout your lifetime, when you need to raise the calcium levels in your body fluids, those osteoclasts get activated and they dissolve some of the bony matrix along those surfaces. And then when you need to quit doing that, they stop functioning and osteoblasts will deposit new bone in those locations. So you constantly have this bone resorption that takes place, and you have bone synthesis that counteracts it when you need to lower the calcium levels in your body fluids. So it's a kind of a back and forth type thing. And just to kind of give you an idea about how often this is going on, you actually recycle about 5 to 7% of your bone mass every week. Your spongy bone is actually replaced about every 3 to 4 years, and you even replace your compact bone about every 10 years with this back and forth. We're resorbing bone, and then we're going to synthesize it. We're going to replace it. We're going to resorb it, and we're going to replace it. And another interesting fact is that the area, as you might imagine too, the parts of your skeletal system that deal with the most weight, have the most stresses placed on them, you don't do as much bone resorption. The osteoclasts in those areas are not quite as active. On the other hand, in parts of the skeletal system that don't bear as much weight, don't have as much stress placed on them, the osteoclasts are more active in those locations. So this is this constant cycling of between bone synthesis and bone remodeling or resorption that takes place, not remodeling, bone resorption that takes place throughout your lifetime to help properly shape your bones and also to help you maintain calcium homeostasis, a very critical aspect of human physiology. All right, the next lecture we're actually going to apply some of this information we've learned about bone growth and remodeling as we discuss different types of bone fractures.